The coronavirus pandemic shows no signs of slowing in Brazil, with over 20,000 new cases reported this Monday. Hundreds of workers rallied in cities across the United States this Monday as part of a nationwide demonstration demanding improvements to Black Americans' experiences in the workplace. The executive director of the W.H.O Health Emergencies Program has voiced alarm at the spread of COVID-19 in Africa. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Brazilian health authorities reported over 20,000 new coronavirus cases this Monday and more than 600 COVID-19 fatalities. According to the daily report issued by the Brazilian Health Ministry, the total number of positive cases identified has now risen to over 2.1 million, while the COVID-19 death toll surpassed 80,000. The South American country continues to be the second hardest hit in the world in terms of both the number of cases and fatalities, only surpassed by the United States, which has reported more than 3.9 million cases and a death toll of over 143,000. According to official figures, Chile is registering 45 COVID-19 deaths per 100,000 inhabitants. This figure places Chile as the worst-hit country in South America in terms of coronavirus fatalities, even above countries like Brazil and Peru, which have reported more cases and deaths. According to economists, the neoliberal model in place in Chile is the main cause of this situation. Experts point out that the government of Sebastián Piñera prioritizes subsidies for the private health system, thus neglecting the public system and leading to its collapse. Paraguay's leaders have analysed the progress of the country's smart quarantine and the resources needed to implement the post-COVID-19 economic recovery plan. The meeting was attended by President Mario Abdo Benitez, the head of the National Congress, Oscar Salomon, and the President of the Supreme Court of Justice, Alberto Martinez Simón. The agenda discussed the progress of the smart quarantine imposed from May, as well as the recovery plans that authorities should implement in the wake of the crisis caused by the novel coronavirus pandemic. The meeting also addressed the complicated situation in border cities, virtually paralysed since the imposition of measures in March to prevent the spread of the virus. For the first time in 5 months, Cuba has reported no new positive cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. By the end of Sunday, the COVID-19 figures in Cuba stood at 2,446 cases since the first was confirmed on March 12th. Director of Epidemiology at the Cuban Ministry of Public Health, Dr. Francisco Duran, also reported this Monday that Cuba has no COVID-19 patients in a serious condition and has not reported a COVID-19 death for the past 9 days. Families living in precarious conditions in Guatemala have denounced the high cost of food as a result of the coronavirus crisis, while adding that government support has yet to reach all parts of the country.
Thousands of Guatemalan families have been forced to increase their working hours to cope with the rising cost of basic goods.
Everything is expensive, even fruits and vegetables. Prices continue going up. We need to do something about this.
Those affected by the high prices point out that industrialized products have not dropped in price since the novel coronavirus started to spread in the country.
In the stores, the price of soap went up, sugar and rice too. Guatemala does not harvest rice. So what's going to happen? That disease is not slowing down. It's only getting worse.
The price hikes are reportedly caused by multiple restrictions that force traders to recover losses.
They increase the prices because if they don't, then they will lose. That's the problem. It's affecting all of us. It's not just the trader or just the buyer. We are all affected by this pandemic.
As a result of a collapse in their economies, many families have seen their income drastically reduced and forced to seek new ways to sustain themselves.
If this disease wouldn't exist, people could look for work and have something to eat. But because of this disease, they cannot go out. So what will they do? What will they eat?
And while the cost of living increases, thousands of families in precarious conditions still do not receive government support.
The March for Dignity arrived in Colombia's capital, Bogotá, on Monday to demand respect for life and justice in the face of the ongoing assassinations of social and indigenous leaders, campesinos and black Colombians. Social and human rights organizations began marching from the city of Barrancabermeja in the Colombian state of Santander on July 13th. The activists have denounced the humanitarian crisis across the country and demanded that the Colombian government take action to halt the violence that has caused the death of 160 social leaders and signatories to the peace agreement this year. Meanwhile, sittings were seen in other parts of the capital. The demonstrations are taking place in the context of the 210th anniversary of Colombia's independence. As part of the celebration of the 41st anniversary of the triumph of the Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua, President Daniel Ortega stated that during his mandate more than 500 investments have been made in the health sector, reflecting the readiness of his government to face the coronavirus pandemic.
From 2007 to date, the following investments have been made in the health infrastructure. 19 hospitals have been built, which explains the ability to treat the population. 2 national hospitals, 1 provincial hospital, 16 general hospitals, 18 health centers, 452 health stations, 128 maternity homes.
And we're taking a short break now, but we'll be right back, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Chief medical officers of the Caribbean community have been praised for their role in helping the region to successfully manage the COVID-19 outbreak. Director of Human Development at the CARICOM Secretariat, Helen Royer, expressed recognition of their efforts at the opening ceremony of the 28th meeting of Chief Medical Officers of the Caribbean community. She added that although they had many long and sleepless nights, they were now reaping the benefits of their commitment to ensure the people of the Caribbean were safe. The official also commended CARICOM institutions such as the Caribbean Public Health Agency, the Caribbean Disaster and Emergency Management Agency, and the University of the West Indies for their contributions.
You would realize there were different priorities. There were 4.
Barbados recorded 1 new case of COVID-19 on Saturday when a passenger on a British Airways flight tested positive on arrival at the Grantley Adams International Airport. The 76-year-old Barbadian was among 67 passengers on the flight who were tested for the coronavirus. There were over 200 passengers on board, but all the others had presented valid negative COVID-19 PCR test results. The latest diagnosis brought the number of confirmed cases in Barbados to 105 and the number of people in isolation to 7. 91 people have recovered from the virus, while 7 have died. A total of 97 tests have been conducted by the Best dos Santos Public Health Laboratory in recent days, bringing the total number of tests conducted since February 11th to over 9,400. And the Health Minister of Barbados spoke about the travel protocols put in place in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic.
We know that this person was positive, so we then were able to trace where they went in the airport and who they would have met and so forth. And those persons at the airport would have been well protected in any event. But what I'm saying is that is the kind of detail that we are looking at to try not to expose too many people to this virus through third parties, people coming in.
Cuban weather forecasters have noted that this hurricane season is expected to be more active than usual in the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. The hurricane season in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico officially began on June 1st and lasts through November. A few days after the season began, 3 tropical storms were reported, representing a record number for a season in its early days. Cuban institutions such as the Forecast Center and the Maritime Surveillance Center contribute to the efforts to predict the paths and intensity of storms and hurricanes throughout the season in order to adopt the necessary risk management measures. Hundreds of people gathered outside San Francisco City Hall in the U.S. state of California on Monday as part of the nationwide Strike for Black Lives protest against systemic racism and economic inequality.
You know, structural racism is front and center. We know that, the people who are most harmed by COVID are black and brown and API people. We also know that the police continues to kill black people arbitrarily. The police have now become the judge, the juror, and the executioner.
Our union represents a lot of people of color who live and work in San Francisco. And so at a time when our nation is really thinking about the fact that Black lives do matter, and as we go through our budget process, we are prioritizing the African American community, we have to acknowledge that a lot of the African American community also has jobs here in City Hall, and we shouldn't be cutting those jobs.
We are the lowest paid. They haven't did anything around blacks getting fired first. They haven't did anything about blacks having longer probationary periods. They haven't did anything about we have the highest medical separations.
The Russian Defense Ministry is predicting the high effectiveness of a COVID-19 vaccine developed by its scientists. Researchers at the National Research Center for Epidemiology and Microbiology carried out preclinical trials in animals, leading to the prediction that the neutralizing activity of the vaccine candidate will provoke a long-term immune response in the human body. The last group of participants in the human trials of the vaccine was discharged from a Moscow hospital this Monday. According to tests, they have developed antibodies against the coronavirus, while the components of the vaccine have proven to be safe. Scientists at Oxford University in the United Kingdom reported this Monday that their experimental coronavirus vaccine prompted a protective immune response in hundreds of people who got the shot. Researchers first began testing the vaccine in April on about 1,000 people, half of whom were injected with the experimental vaccine. In research published on Monday in the Lancet Medical Journal, scientists said that they found their experimental COVID-19 vaccine had produced a dual immune response in people aged 15 to 55, and the response lasted at least 2 months after they were immunized. The Spanish health minister called on the population to exercise caution as 201 COVID-19 outbreaks have been reported across Spain.
There are currently 201 outbreaks in our country with 2,289 associated cases. These outbreaks are mainly associated with the seasonal fruit picking work and above all with the areas where there is a relaxation of measures, those that we have experienced to the point of boredom, but I insist on the fact that we must respect them. Use of masks, distances between people, hand washing, it is where these measures are relaxed that the outbreaks appear. I want to call for prudence and caution. We must not be afraid of the virus, but we must not lose the respect due to it, and thereof, I insist. I call for caution, not to lower our guard even in those places where we may feel more comfortable, in family gatherings, more familiar environment, and that is where we must strengthen ourselves. And there too, we must be extremely careful, especially in the young population segments.
Vietnam has now seen 95 days without any locally transmitted coronavirus cases. The 243 COVID-19 cases confirmed in Vietnam since April 16th were people who returned from abroad. The commission in charge of containing the pandemic announced that of the 383 people who have tested positive for COVID-19, 357 have fully recovered. Vietnam has not reported any COVID-19 deaths, which, along with the small number of cases, has earned the country the praise of the World Health Organization, experts and institutions across the world. Now we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Executive Director of the WHO Health Emergencies Programme, Dr. Michael Ryan, has voiced alarm at the spread of COVID-19 in Africa. The African continent has now reported more than 700,000 coronavirus cases, and South Africa is now the fifth most affected country in the world.
While South Africa is experiencing a very, very severe event, I think it is really a marker of what the continent could face if urgent action is not taken to provide further support. So I think, and we've seen this in other regions, sometimes this disease can take off very quickly, and sometimes in other situations it takes off more slowly and then accelerates, and it's difficult to understand fully why that is the case. But I'm very concerned right now that we're beginning to see an acceleration of disease in Africa.
Opponents of Mali's president erected barricades in the capital Bamako on Monday after international mediators failed to resolve the political crisis in the West African country. The 15-nation Economic Community of West African States ended a mediation mission to Mali on Sunday with a list of reform proposals. However, the opposition rejected the proposals as they did not address its main demand, the resignation of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. The president and the opposition June 5th movement have been locked in a political standoff for weeks, which spiraled into violent clashes earlier this month, leaving 11 dead and over 150 injured. Community mediators on Sunday suggested forming a new unity government and appointing new judges to Mali's constitutional court who could potentially re-examine the disputed election results. Demonstrators took to the streets of Guinea's capital, Conakry, claiming that President Alpha Condé plans to extend his term in office. Following 3 months of inaction due to COVID-19 restrictions, the National Front for the Defence of the Constitution resumed demonstrations on Monday. The Guinean Security Ministry noted that only a few people turned out for the protests, which included attempts to set up barricades, the spilling of motor oil on roads, and clashes with security forces. President Condé enacted a new constitution in April, which was overwhelmingly backed by voters in a referendum that was opposed by the opposition. Among the changes were presidential term limits, causing opponents to claim that Condé would seek to remain in power. Guinea's general elections are set to be held in October this year.
The city is completely paralyzed because of the rain and especially because of the massive deployment of forces. People have not been able to march on the agreed routes, but all the neighborhoods have gone out. The young people have burned the tires, set up the barricades. The whole city is paralyzed today. I think that we achieved the goal to show that in Guinea there are people who suffer injustice and that the people of Guinea do not support this third mandate of President Alpha Condé. Given the objectives of the National Front for the Defense of the Constitution, they should have realized since 22 March that this approach had no chance of succeeding and should have relied on what has always brought us together, namely dialogue. Even if it was sometimes difficult to implement the agreements, in the end they allowed us to spend a decade in the exercise of democracy and building our democracy.
Officials reported on Sunday that the death toll from heavy monsoon rains across South Asia has climbed to nearly 200. Authorities in Bangladesh and Nepal warned that rising waters would bring further flooding. Torrential rains during the monsoon season between June and September trigger floods, landslides and lightning strikes across the region every year, killing hundreds. Officials in Bangladesh said at least 67 people had died and another 2.6 million had been affected by swollen rivers. Meanwhile, in Nepal, 79 people have died and 46 are missing after floods and landslides, with the government warning of rising river levels over the next 3 days. Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry arrived in Ramallah on Monday for talks with the Palestinian leadership on the Israeli plan to annex parts of the West Bank.
What we talked about today was extremely important, which is coordinating efforts and following these efforts to reach the prevention of annexation, and in how to provide appropriate atmosphere for how to return to negotiations in accordance with international legitimacy and internationally approved preferences. We seek to find the appropriate framework in accordance with the decisions of international legitimacy and in accordance with the Arab Initiative and the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people in order to resume the political track and negotiations leading to a two-state solution, which is the ideal solution that allows the Palestinian and Israeli people to live in peace and security away from the conflict.
The Syrian health minister has warned that the increasing number of COVID-19 cases could lead to a bigger outbreak if measures are not adopted to curb the spread of the virus.
The number of infections with the coronavirus increases in Syria, where the outcome of infections has reached 522 infections, including the number of infections recorded today. As the virus expands horizontally and vertically, horizontal, which is spread at the provincial level, vertical means an increase in the number of infections. It could become a wider outbreak if the individuals and social safeguards are not adhered to. We received some medical aid from China and some from Russia. We thank them for it, but there is no communication in this matter with the Arab countries. It is forbidden to transfer medicine to Syria because drug agents are prohibited for dealing with Syria, and money transfers to import medicine and medical equipment through the Central Bank of Syria are prohibited. So there are sanctions against the Syrian people, largely through the Caesar Act.
Health authorities in Pakistan resumed the polio vaccination campaign on Monday following a 4-month pause due to the novel coronavirus pandemic. Pakistani health authorities have reported 58 polio cases this year, while World Health Organization officials have noted that the transmission of the virus continues to be widespread. The door-to-door anti-polio campaign aims to initially vaccinate about 800,000 children under the age of 5 in high-risk districts. Meanwhile, health authorities have noted that the outbreak of COVID-19 has already had a significant impact on the public health system. Pakistan has recorded over 265,000 COVID-19 cases and a death toll of over 5,500.
Yes, polio vaccine should be given. The team did not come to our house because of the coronavirus, which made it difficult for us, but we gave our child polio drops from a nearby center. It's been 4 months since to run 2 to 3 campaigns, which we couldn't do, but now we have started the campaign again. In this campaign, we will be vaccinating the children of 10 union consuls.
The tourism industry in Tunisia resumed operations on Monday after more than 3 months of closure due to the coronavirus pandemic.
We can save the whole season, but we are going to try everything to save part of it, and especially to restore confidence. That's the most important thing right now, is that the people who work in tourism regain confidence and believe in again. I believe that this has been achieved with the arrival of this plane and others soon.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but we finish with the song Our Voice Rises, produced to mark the 15th anniversary of the launch of Telesur. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website and on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching and enjoy the music.
Sonriendo entre los feroces arquitectos de zarpazos, señal que no pierde el paso, amplificando otras voces.
Las voces desobedientes, mestizas de ese salobre, indio, campesino y pobre, más humano que clientes.
Semiótica que entra al juego desde la piel del sufrido, júbilo que bajo fuego más se yergue convencido, ni sudaca con espuelas, ni parlante mal nacido,
negativas verdaderas ante el falso positivo.
La espada de libertad hacia el sol, se levanta nuestra voz. Soy como tú eres como yo, se levanta nuestra voz. Desde su rostro sur tu corazón, se levanta nuestra voz. Entérate, despiértate, nuestra voz. Las plazas con las abuelas se van llanto de cenizas, deshielos que van deprisa, glaciares de viejas penas. Continente de maíz, de quinoa, soya y arroz, curándose el hambre atroz que anclaron en su raíz. Caravana de migrantes corrigiendo con los pies los geométricos sangrantes cálculos de Pan Cortés.
Periodismo compañero del estudiante sangrando, ojos que siguen mirando de frente al carabinero.
Y de colores de blanco y pala, se levanta nuestra voz. La hierba buena, la hierba mala, se levanta
innovation, science,